Can you teach entrepreneurship?
Can you sort of make somebody more risk-seeking? I'm not sure.
Being an entrepreneur is the worst of all jobs, except for everything else.
Yeah.
With it comes a lot of pressure, unpredictability, mouths to feed.
Business school teaches you that ideas and a business are fundamentally different things.
If you are an entrepreneur and you're applying to business school, you definitely have to make a very clear case for why you want to be there.
Welcome back to the mbaMission podcast, your go-to resource for everything MBA admissions and beyond. Today's topic is a big one and a question we hear all the time. Can business school really prepare you to be an entrepreneur? Today, Jeremy Shinewald and I will talk to you about our own adventures after we both got our MBAs, about the companies we built, what we learned in business school, and how business school made our entire journey easier. In this episode, we're digging into the real value of an MBA for entrepreneurs, the lessons, the network, the credibility, and yes, the things you might not expect. We'll also talk about how aspiring founders should think about selecting schools, shaping their MBA experience, and using it as a launchpad for something big. If you're dreaming of building your own venture or just want to understand how business school can shape a startup journey, this conversation is packed with honest insight and practical advice. So you know, Steve Jobs never got an MBA. And neither did Bill Gates.
Or Jeff Bezos.
Yep, that's right. So, hey.
Or Mark Zuckerberg, or I'm trying to think of some ancient entrepreneur before the MBA even existed.
Right. Well, Warren Buffett did not get an MBA. Got a master's from Columbia, but not an MBA. But let me give you a couple of responses. The first is true, except Andy Jassy, who's running Amazon, now got an MBA from Harvard.
He was a member of Devi Valanani's class, a member of our team.
There we go. And of course, Tim Cook.
Duke Fuqua, Satya Nadella.
Exactly, Microsoft.
Yeah.
And all those guys got MBAs. And
but I think Larry Ellison didn't even finish high school, and we're really focused on...
That's right. I mean, but listen, Bill Gates never finished college.
Right, and I'm sure he didn't finish high school because he was just an entrepreneurial kind of guy.
Yeah.
But you know, for every well, I don't think you need an MBA to be running a massive company.
No.
But you know, there are lots of exceptions, and then there are some some MBAs out there for sure.
Right.
I just want to say something.
Yeah, and you were one of them. You were actually an MBA who became an entrepreneur.
Indeed.
I was an MBA who became an entrepreneur.
Right.
So, can you teach entrepreneurship?
Well, I mean, I guess maybe before we even talk about can you teach entrepreneurship, maybe taking a step back and just like even defining entrepreneurship in today's context, right? Because I think very obviously there's the concept of like, yes, someone, I guess, like me who had an idea and just was like, I'm gonna try and build this thing. I'm trying to build around it. I'm trying to make it as, fortify it, make it as strong as possible, make it profitable, to make it something that benefits all stakeholders. Right. That's sort of very conventional sense of entrepreneurship. Yeah. And I think that is what overwhelms people's brain when they think about entrepreneurship and think about going to business school. I will leave and I will start my company. As it turns out, it's not that common that people leave and start their own company, with the exception maybe of a couple of programs. And even then, a couple programs, they don't break down their specific entrepreneurial stats. Right. And so people leave to be entrepreneurs, but many of them fall under a new category that I think has developed the last 10 years or so, entrepreneurship through acquisition.
That's right. Or I was even going to say intrapreneurship. This notion here of you can be, before we talk about ETA, we'll talk about this notion that many MBA graduates are actually very entrepreneurial. They're very innovative, but that's within bigger companies. It would not be unusual for someone to be at a big company. I mean, General Electric is sort of your classic case where you go in there for a couple of years and then you start seeing things differently. And then they actually give you, your own balance sheet, your own income statement, and say, go run. That, in fact, again, I don't have statistics about that, but that feels to me like a fairly common thing to have happened for someone who's in his career 3, 4, 5 years with an MBA.
Right. Like if you're a product manager, you're responsible for some product features, and you start to improve your product, and if you can find anything from some massive product like the iPhone or some small thing like a yogurt at General Mills, and you can find a new way of I remember there was an article a long time ago about someone who figured out how to do like squeezable yogurt and it was like that person shot up the ranks and the CEO actually from Darden, Steve Reinemund, who was at Pizza Hut,
yes.
and was basically made his name in getting the delivery process going, which we take completely for granted right now, and revolutionized that business and shot up the ranks at Pepsi. So they're all sorts of different kinds of examples.
Absolutely.
Of course.
And now I'm going to give you an example. Kellogg MBA consultant just ate terribly, 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 and she got in her mind, okay, let me see if I can do some healthy snacks. So she did that. Great company. $700 million later, she truly is one of the most successful Kellogg MBAs. Catherine Burnell of Reharvest, a 2018 Kellogg graduate.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that recently. Wow.
Yes,
good for her.
Yes.
Exciting news. You can now access On Track by mbaMission for free. Take our 2-minute onboarding questionnaire to personalize your learning path. Choose the free plan, and you'll have unlimited access to our complete modules on MBA application timelines, standardized testing, your professional background, community leadership, school selection, and more. You'll also get access to select lessons from our brainstorming, personal statement, essay, resume, and recommendation modules. It's a great introduction to the On Track platform and will help you jumpstart the MBA application process. Get started today at ontrack.mbamission.com. So there's entrepreneurs as we conventionally think of them.
That's right.
There are intrapreneurs.
Yep.
And then there's one that's become quite popular, which is entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Yep.
I remember a couple of years ago, Jessica Schlar, one of our colleagues, had an individual who he was basically afraid to even apply to Harvard, and she kept pushing him, and he applied and got in, and when he was there, two professors backed him in a search fund, which led him to search fund. Basically, you find backers who will contribute, front you the money, front you the money to search, and then they get a first claim on an opportunity to invest when you find the company. Right. And he went out and he bought, I believe, a pest control company somewhere in the Midwest or something like that, and is running it right now. And it's we'll have to have him on the podcast at some point.
Yeah, that's great. But I happen to like entrepreneurship through acquisition. Yeah. And I just really like it. When I was leaving Bain & Company, I said, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. And honestly, I had one vision of what it meant to be an entrepreneur. And one of the partners who was very close to said to me, you know what you should do? Go out and buy yourself a company. And because, first of all, there's nothing like a company that's actually making money. Right. And it's like, you talk about entrepreneurship. If you want to make money, that's not a bad place to start. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. As well as this notion here of it's hard to be an entrepreneur. When you buy another company, you bring partners, you bring wisdom with you. And for me, that is such an important piece of the puzzle. Right. And I think I've received a whole bunch of memes in the last little while of like, a bunch of people in gray suits or something like that, and there's sort of like the chiding meme of like, these are the future HBS grads who will own HVAC companies, because that's right.
It appears like there are certain segments that a lot of entrepreneurs through acquisition have really keyed in on in the last couple of years. Right. And very stable businesses with recurring revenue that are service oriented, that maybe aren't too complicated. I mean, I think it would be complicated to actually, fix the HVAC systems. I'm sure you need to have a lot of education around that. But there are a couple of industries like that. That's right. Where like service industries where with recurring revenue that have really been taken over by a lot of MBAs. I think we're looking for a new thesis these days. Exactly. One was at my house yesterday. Name is Sila, S-I-L-A, an HVAC company. It actually is backed by Goldman Sachs, and they have been going around the country and sort of pulling all these mom and pop shops together. And suddenly they overlay sort of systems on top of that. They suddenly leverage marketing in a different way. Right. They sort of have all this back office happening right there. And, very, very, I don't want to say very quickly, but very deliberately, they start building out actually very big companies. Right. Right. And exactly. I think once you get like sort of the core process figured out, you can bolt on other acquisitions. Exactly. So it sort of leads us back to this. So you got entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, entrepreneurship through acquisition. Yep. I don't know, are we missing anything? No, we got it covered. So I think the conventional definition. We know all these MBA entrepreneurs. We know some people who were entrepreneurs without an MBA. Yes. Can you teach entrepreneurship?
when you say teach entrepreneurship, I guess what do we actually mean by entrepreneurship when we mean by teaching? So on the one hand, an entrepreneur is a businessman, right? So at the end of the day, any businessman needs to know accounting. Businessman, businesswoman needs to know accounting. They certainly need to know some basics of marketing. The reality is there's an operations piece to everything. So can you teach that? Absolutely.
Right.
If you're talking about sort of at risk tolerance, can you sort of make somebody more risk-seeking?
Right.
I'm not sure.
Or more like, or more of a strategic thinker and combined with that risk-taking.
Right.
Yeah, like that. That's interesting. So I can only speak, I can speak from my own experience as an entrepreneur. I was a speechwriter, as anyone who's listened to this podcast knows. And I had no foundation in I clearly understood what like marketing was or accounting was, but I couldn't identify. I couldn't really understand them as disciplines and understand how they interacted with each other. So for me, I felt like I was always a fairly creative thinker. I always felt like I was going to start a business at some point in my life.
Right.
But having the foundation to understand, like, simple things like how to manage cash flow, or how to create, how to create like an environment that people would want to be a part of, how to treat people fundamentally.
Right.
All of that for me came from a core curriculum, and I felt very fortunate that Darden had an entire first year core curriculum that was connected to those disciplines: operations, marketing, accounting, finance, strategy, and slightly nuanced names, but that's basically what they were. To give me that foundation. Now, maybe not everyone needs that, but for me, I felt like it was almost. I think maybe the reverse for a lot of people. Like I think that a lot of people have those disciplines and they want to learn how to try and identify and find that creative idea.
Think about how they interconnect and how everything is a strategic decision.
Right. That's true.
Right.
But I think a lot of people come into business school thinking like, I want to go, I feel like I have some of the education. I want to go to business school to be inspired to think about the next big thing so I can go after it. And I think for me, at least, I was probably the opposite, where I was like, okay, I can get excited about an idea. I can go after it with a lot of energy. I think I can figure out what works. I need to understand how to run a business financially, fundamentally. And I think that is actually undervalued by a lot of people. I think a lot of people think it's the idea. Like
business school teaches you that ideas and a business are fundamentally different things. Right. There are a lot of great ideas out there.
And there are a lot of like third, 15th movers. Like it's not just that there was, MySpace and Friendster before Facebook. There were probably 50 other people who had something like that idea that didn't even get it to Friendster or MySpace status. They got it to like 12 friends. There's just, it isn't, it's ironic. Like the idea is actually a very, very small, very small piece. It's all about the execution.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I've done some entrepreneurial things over the years. I've certainly gotten to know a lot of people. I cannot tell you how many people come up, hey, here's a great idea. Here's a great idea. Yes, it's a great idea. I agree with you. It's a great idea. Turn it into a business. And business schools can help you do that. The thing that I liked about business school, and I saw it certainly at MIT, a lot of other schools see it, is you have to almost get some muscle memory about what a good business looks like. And it almost is sort of industry agnostic. So in the sense of, you go in there and you've been in this situation. Sometimes you go into a business, I mean, in very personal ways, you go into business and you're like, you look around, you see what's happening. It's like, this is a no-go. And sometimes it's just almost by feel. So if you're in a business school where you're seeing, business after business, business plan competitions, you're not even participating, you're seeing them, or they have an incubator, you're seeing it, and you're talking to classmates who are doing interesting things. Are there people around sort of the entire university who are doing other interesting things? At some point you start picking up, it's like, you know what? There's sort of all this, you sort of get a sense of where the magic will happen and where it won't happen. And people always say, oh, you have to really, as a businessman, you have to sort of dig in and really, and I'm sort of on the opposite, which is like, you got to go out there, you got to see a lot of stuff. You have to constantly even, dipping your toe in at times, which business school allows you to do. And then at that point, you're able to say, okay, now I know what's going to work.
I had a business school professor who had started many businesses, some really big ones. And he said to our class, and it was, I think before entrepreneurship through acquisition was a term. That's basically what he was talking about. He was trying to show us this avenue. And he said, if you want to go buy a small business, it's got to be like a full-time job. You've got to be fully committed to it, and you've got to be constantly reviewing. At least, like, you're not going to go out there and bump into your neighbor and be like, "Oh, your business is for sale. We can work on a deal." He's like, it might have been that way in the 1940s. He's like, when there was like a totally, when there wasn't a transparent market, and where there wasn't signals weren't being received. Like maybe your world of buyers was small at that point, but now there's, you can put a business on a website and get 50. I'm on a whole bunch of listservs for businesses, and get you're competing against other people who are in that listserv. Like it's hard to get that. That HVAC business or that tree pruning business or whatever it is, that wholesaler or, whatever it might be. So you're right. You've got to see a lot of businesses.
One thing I will say when it comes to entrepreneurship through acquisition, we're having this conversation beforehand. First of all, the entire concept, the entire, ecosystem for it has really matured over the last few years. And again, business schools, I was looking at the list of ETA competitions, conferences, it's all over the place. The Southeast in particular, places like Vanderbilt, Duke, that never had it in the past, now have their own conferences, which is amazing. On the other hand, there's also the world of business brokers. And people, this notion here, it used to be, talk to your accountant's brother, he's selling a business. Now it is actually, I looked up the number, there's 5,000 business brokers out there. And that's just tremendous. And again, I want to I'm sure people watching the podcast want to hear about sort of the traditional more, the Facebooks. But the reality is if you are thinking about entrepreneurship, certainly one way of looking at it is, in fact, going out and buying a business. Business schools now do a much better job at helping you do that.
Yeah, for sure. They're better ecosystems. And even like there are schools, Chicago, Booth has the Hyde Park Angels. They've got an affiliated angel group that will support, not just blindly, obviously, they'll critically evaluate and support, University of Chicago grads as an example. There are others out there for sure. You're right. There's a much better developed ecosystem now than there was years ago. But going back to kind of the fundamental question, maybe in the traditional sense, can you teach entrepreneurship? I think that over the last 20 years, and maybe Stanford was like a bit of a leader here with like the startup garage, that type of thing. There's been a growth in courses that kind of try and take you through, force you to go through the early stages of developing a concept, recognizing that 19 out of 20 or more, probably 49 out of 50 of these things are going to go nowhere. Still make you go through the process of iterating on a product and figuring out if it's going to work, and they put them together different. Every school has their own different whistle, of course. But forcing you to kind of take the early stages and at least walk, which is fantastic. I mean, it's a great way to test yourself in a risk-free environment.
And it also forces you to find teammates who are likely much different from yourself. And I think that's always the hardest thing. Sort of an entrepreneur working on their own, they're likely going to be talking to people who are sort of like them. As opposed to if you go to business school and suddenly you have the sales guy sitting next to the finance guy, sitting next to the tech guy, and that's what makes for successful companies at the end of the day. And the Steve Wozniak for the Steve Jobs relationship, the Steve Ballmer versus Bill Gates relationship. Exactly.
But and then the schools, many schools, take this even further where they'll say like, we have a summer program. You can go into our summer accelerator. We'll give you some legal advice. You'll have a mentor.
Exactly.
We can even, we recognize there's some risk associated with that. We can even give you several schools have stipends for those individuals.
That's right. The Rock Center over at Harvard has a stipend for the summer.
I got a call this week from someone from Northwestern asking for some advice on his startup. He's a first year student, and he said, it's wonderful. Like if I can get this off the ground, I can get a bit of a stipend from Northwestern, from Kellogg.
That's great.
And it'll give me the liberty to try this. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Good for you.
Absolutely.
And these schools are competitive. Like where one has a stipend, the other will figure it out.
Absolutely. But this notion of going to business school with a idea that you're then going to turn into a business, I always push back and say, listen, you're about to spend $250,000, 2 years of your life. If you really have that burning idea and you're ready to do something, take that money, take that time, and all in on that.
And people say, well, when's the right time to start a business? I often say the right time is like it's like when you can't sleep at night because you're thinking about it so much. You're like, it's not that I want to do this. Like, I've got to do this. Like, someone else might do this if I don't get moving on this now. Someone else might figure it out. Like, it's not like it would be cool to be an entrepreneur. And in that respect, as an applicant, I remember many years ago talking to D. Leopold, the former director of admissions at Harvard Business School. And it was during a time, maybe like right after Instagram was sold. It was like 8 guys, and they sold for $2 billion. And suddenly everyone thought like, whoa, this is easy.
Exactly. I'll just do my own Instagram.
Exactly. I'll get 7 friends together and we'll all be almost billionaires. And so suddenly people were writing about how they wanted to be entrepreneurs. And she kind of joked. She's like, it's like people saying, I want to be in a band. Like they want to be rock stars. They just don't necessarily have the musical talent, and they don't realize how hard it is. And they don't realize how rare it is. And so I always thought that was funny and an apt analogy.
I think
because you know, not everyone is just going to go to business school with an idea and walk out an entrepreneur. And there are realities of having debt or having to
Exactly. One of my professors said, I was going to say, one of my professors said, the most important thing in being an entrepreneur is making sure your spouse or partner has health care. It's like, your life has to go on. At the end of the day, life has to go on, and sort of romanticizing this notion of, I worked 150 hours a week. And the reality is, it's like, it was all in on that. Yes. But recognize, and maybe business school teaches you in different ways. Maybe one of the things that they teach you, it's like, it's going to be a slog, and you have to recognize that, and you have to sort of make your life work in that.
For sure. I've said to my wife before that I don't think I could have started a business had I like I needed the first 8-9 years starting mbaMission and running it just to put my head down and do it. Like if I had another mouth to feed, I probably couldn't have kept the business afloat. I needed to reinvest all my time, energy, and money into building the apparatus to make it work. I also remember when I was at Darden talking to schools have amazing entrepreneurial guest speakers that they bring through every school. It's a cavalcade of grads. People, no matter who you are, you love the feeling of getting in front of a group of impressionable people and telling them about the great decisions you've made. And so Jonathan Ledecky came through, and he has owned, he's taken many companies public. He's owned a couple sports franchises. I think he owned the Islanders for a while. He also, I want to say, he's owned a few. He owned a piece of the Capitals, and he came through. And I said to him afterwards, I bumped into him in the hall. I said, can I ask you a question, Mr. Ledecky? I said, I want to start a company. And I said, would you say like start it off right away, like right after school? And, or you say, wait, like when's the right time? Kind of, and I didn't have the hindsight to say the right time is when you can't sleep at night. And he said to me the same thing you just said. And he said, look, you've got to make sure you can pay your bills. You've got to make sure that you can live. He's like, you're not going to be an effective entrepreneur if your credit cards are maxed out. Like he's like, this is the thing of romance.
That's right. It is the thing of romance. Absolutely.
He's like, if your credit cards are maxed out and you can't make your bills, and that's like 6 weeks from now, like you're not going to be able to make it as an entrepreneur. He said, if you have to save for a couple of years, if you're really an entrepreneur, you'll be an entrepreneur in 2 years, in 3 years. I thought that was very, very good advice and very fair advice.
Listen, I also say being an entrepreneur, you have to recognize the fact that maybe you know something that other people don't, but also recognize the fact that maybe you don't. At the end of the day, being an entrepreneur, I think, is really about having tough conversations with yourself, having tough conversations with people, and recognizing, yes, I'm an entrepreneur, but you got to build a business. You have to be realistic. That I've been at it for 3 years. I've made no money. Guess what? You don't have a business. I hate to say that, but you don't have a business.
I always paraphrase. Churchill, who said, democracy is the worst of all systems except everything else. And I'm like, being an entrepreneur is the worst of all jobs except for everything else. With it comes a lot of pressure. It becomes some unpredictability, mouths to feed. It's not the same as having a job at McKinsey or Deloitte or any other number, United Technologies or any other number of places where people go after business school. It's a very, very different choice for you. And there are some cool programs, there are some cool classes at schools which are like, I think outside of the box for a lot of people who think about entrepreneurship, where I think they're thinking like, I want to go to a class on like ideation, and I want to go to a class on product development, and I want to go to the D school at Harvard and figure out all sorts of creative ways to look at products. But like there are classes in organizational behavior where you actually get to know more about yourself. You actually do a lot of introspection,
that's
start to understand your risk to profile, start to really like look at your life thoughtfully and and really understand maybe what you're capable of, what type of risk, like again, risk profile, what characteristics you have as a leader. And maybe that's where you are kind of taking a step back and saying, one of these things is for me, or maybe this is for me later.
That's the thing, I think. Is it for me later? But also there's almost like an old truism. If 5 years into your career, your decisions are not just about people, about helping people, talking to people, working with people, getting the most out of people. If you're not focused on people, 5 years out of your career, something has gone wrong. This idea here of 5 years after an MBA, you should not still be doing spreadsheets. You should not be doing PowerPoint. So the place where you can sort of figure out your leadership skills, figure out how to work with people, negotiate with people, and everything else is business school. There's actually really no other great place to do it where it's so risk-free.
My God, I'm 21 years old and I did a spreadsheet and used some PowerPoint to
yesterday.
What am I doing?
Because you got to get to know more people. I think that's it. So that business school, it happens to be very good, and people, I think, take it a little bit for granted. Business school is very good at helping you understand relationships better. As sort of, negotiation, sort of the nature of power. I think that's what's really interesting.
So I think if we were to sort of like bucket it, I think we would say that most business schools, if you want to be a conventional entrepreneur, at this point are going to give you opportunities to take a class where you incubate an idea, where you test it.
Business plan competitions.
Every school will have one of those, where you will, also have some, there'll be an entrepreneurship club. You'll have some access to speakers,
entrepreneurship residents,
the ability to potentially pitch alumni or like network alumni with alumni if you have a good idea. Most schools should be good at, if you are achieving liftoff, giving you some of the next steps to access alumni who might help you along the way. Whether it's like individual angel donors or those who are running VC funds that are connected to the school at some level, or even if they're not alums, they're just the professor's old associate who started a VC fund, or so there's an ecosystem in the and this is just the tip of the iceberg. There of course. Again, there are funding options during the summer for people. There are opportunities
developing
to
relationships with different type of people.
Find co-founders for sure. So there's this kind of ecosystem. There's entrepreneurship, which I think is more just about following your nose when you're in business school.
That's right.
Really just developing whatever weaknesses there are in your profile. Because if you are a brand manager coming to business school, maybe you're focusing on operations, and maybe you're focusing on strategy to kind of round out your skill set to be more capable within the company you go to next, or maybe you're picking up strategy or whatever it might be. And then I think there's also, of course, this entrepreneurship through acquisition. Ecosystem as well, which is about learning to vet.
I think that's right.
And, learning to vet existing companies, learning to do the diligence, learning to, again, to develop your own investor group, potentially, if you're going to do it. There are conferences and competitions.
And listen, entrepreneurship through acquisition, I'll come back to it, and it's really interesting in the sense of entrepreneurship through acquisition allows you also to acquire founders, partners. Generally, it's the person selling the business who spends a couple of years working with you. And I think that in a nutshell is what business school can do very effectively. Help you find people who are very different from who you are, and actually then understand how they work, understand how you work. And at that point, that I think is something that business school really does help you do.
So I guess the key, we haven't really specifically talked about any particular school. I mean, I think we're just talking sort of conceptually in this one. But I think the key is for individuals to kind of say to themselselves, well, okay, which one of these paths might I be on? And
how should I think
change
about
for
it?
you? But which one of these paths might I be on? And then I mean, we're talking about three different approaches across like 15, 20 schools that we couldn't cover all of them, but it's a good future podcast topic for us. Maybe we can go through the ETA schools. We can go through the entrepreneurship schools. I think the entrepreneurship schools are a little bit more challenging.
Right. So let me throw out some ETA schools in particular. Kellogg, and you already mentioned Kellogg and Booth every year.
Yeah,
they do an ETA conference.
Yeah.
Traditionally, also the Midwest, a little bit of a stereotype, have those types of companies that sort of look like companies other people buy. I hate to put it in that way, but it's like you think old industry, old economy, sort of businesses that are slow growth, can be very profitable.
Right.
And I just feel like in the Midwest, middle of the country, it just feels sort of, from a environment perspective, just a place that would be ripe for buying certain types of companies, putting them together, getting them better, faster. So for me, I'm going to highlight Booth and Kellogg as, first of all, they themselves have a great ETA curriculum, but then also they're located in a place that probably lends itself to some great entrepreneurship through acquisition opportunities.
I mean, look, Stanford, Stanford invented the concept. David Dodson at Stanford kind of was the individual who started the entrepreneurship through acquisition for the search fund concept.
Right.
And has an ecosystem out there that's extremely strong, and they've got classes in it. And in addition, there are firms out there that are like search funds of funds that are out there, funding searchers to go out there and find those businesses and scaling them up. Of all things, I got an inquiry recently from an individual who just graduated from MIT who was asking me if he could have access to our clients and in order to try to find people who would be successful searchers in the coming years.
And that's interesting.
I thought about it for a while, and it just sort of went beyond our purview. We couldn't share information. I suppose we could make the opportunity open to some people.
But that makes sense.
But I think most schools that are obviously known for entrepreneurship are going to have some of those resources built out, but clearly it's like a no-brainer that Stanford has that.
So to go the opposite direction, if you will, I think there's a couple of schools that have been very smart. I think it's called the Southeast Acquisition Conference, ETA Conference, which is Duke, UNC, Georgetown, I think maybe Vanderbilt. They have all sort of come together to really develop their own ecosystem of folks looking to buy companies as well as companies looking to be sold. And I think that's, first of all, the Southeast. And again, I'm very geographically minded in terms of what I recommend to schools and just sort of the nature of sort of different communities. And I feel like the Southeast, again, maybe a set of states, communities where businesses are actually, for all sorts of different reasons, some of it generational, sometimes the industry, what they are, overlooked a little bit. So I think going to a Duke or UNC.
Like if you're in a major city and you're looking for an HVAC company right now, those valuations have gone from 5 times to like 12 to 15 times in times.
Exactly.
Because everyone in the world is trying to buy. You've got institutions trying to buy those companies. You've got individual searchers. I bet you these people who are running them and are very happy are very tired of getting solicitations every day from the interns at the search funds.
Let me just talk a little bit about sort of the dynamics of buying a company, because it's something that was sort of new to me and it actually can be very exciting in the sense of many of these companies are eligible for a small business administration loan. That means you're putting down 10% only. The government's helping you out, banks are helping you out, and suddenly this is a very accessible way of becoming an entrepreneur very, very quickly.
I think you need collateral for those. Now, maybe the company has collateral, but you still might have to mind you may be putting your house up as collateral,
maybe
which could be which
could be great or it would be terrible.
I think you can borrow up to $5 million. I think with the SBA loan. I think
listen, good place to start.
Yeah, there's a classmate of mine, Sam Boyd, who I believe is running that program for the SBA.
Is he really?
I believe.
That's great.
Yeah, call Sam. Exactly. Just to make sure he's actually still running that program.
Yeah. It is. I'll tell you. And again, I don't want to. We could do a whole podcast on ETAs.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna just push on one other point. Like I said before, I'm a big believer in geography, particularly when it comes to entrepreneurship. So there are certain cities that I think are just very entrepreneurial places, which then really gives some of their business schools a leg up in terms of being entrepreneurial places themselves. What comes to mind is Pittsburgh. which is a very entrepreneurial city, a very tech-focused city. So Carnegie Mellon Tepper has a really good entrepreneurship community. I mean, we all know sort of your standard great entrepreneurship schools, sort of the Harvard, the MITs, the Stanford, the Berkeleys.
I think Columbia has a
Columbia
wealth
does
of resources.
Well.
Like
Silicon Valley.
Columbia's got this one pager that you can download, at least the last time I was on their site, that gives you all these different tracks and all the different resources. I was just like blown away by what they had.
Right. Olin.
Right.
Washington University, St. Louis. St. Louis is, again, there must be some reasons there, but it's a surprisingly entrepreneurial city.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because I even think of my own hometown as of Winnipeg, Canada, where I think to myself, that is an entrepreneurship through acquisition paradise.
Yes.
Because frankly, it's not like everyone's number one place in the world to live.
Right.
And a lot of young people move away.
Yes.
And so there are a lot of family businesses that will turn over that don't have another generation.
Absolutely.
And like private equity isn't really sniffing out the $20 million business in a relatively isolated part the part of Canada. Again, you might not want to move there. Your family might not want to move there. But like the bottom line is, the more efficient, the bigger the city, the more efficient the market. So if you're in Boston, it's going to be harder to find a business on the cheap than if you're in Tulsa. Nothing against Tulsa. Tulsa's a great city.
Oklahoma City now is getting to be a great city. Actually, they have their own basketball team, so that has to mean something. I was just going to say, I will say one thing here. I think there's a romanticized view of what happens at business schools in terms of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
There's this notion here.
It's hard.
Exactly. There's this notion back of the napkin, showing it to the venture capitalists like, oh, here's $10 million. It doesn't work that way. There was a moment in time when I was in business school and the web was going bananas, when it actually did work that way. Those days are done. Don't even think about that anymore. You have to go in there. You have to be smart. You have to prove that an idea is a business. But that said, business schools, I had a professor, Ed Roberts, great professor, one of the, the founding director of Martrust Center over at MIT, just an incredible guy. And people would say, can you learn to be an entrepreneur? How can you teach it? And he would turn and simply say, listen, at MIT, we've created $2 trillion of annual revenue through the startups coming out of our university. We got to be doing something right. So Jeremy, frequently I'm asked, I'm already an entrepreneur. It's like, why do we even need to go to business school? Is there any value for an MBA if you're already an entrepreneur?
Right. I think there are two pieces that answer. There's the practical piece about how to apply as an applicant if you're an entrepreneur, and then there's the sort of the core question that you're asking. If you are an entrepreneur, you're applying to business school, you definitely have to make a very clear case for why you want to be there, because they don't want to believe that you're using them as like a landing ground for like a quick vacation and like an upskill, and then you'll go back to your business. Especially if you're currently running the business. Like if you're currently running the business, you have to say to them, "I've got a plan. I'm going to. I've got a CEO in place, or my partners are going to take over." So there are some people who will say, I've got a plan. I'm going to take my MBA. I'm going to go back to this business and I'm going to grow it this way. That's a very compelling argument because you're saying I need to skill up to take my company to the next level. There are other people who are saying I'm transitioning out. And it's like, what skills do you need to develop? So I just think you've really, really got to have your story down, because they don't want to think, hey, we're giving up a valuable seat in this class to someone who's going to be actively running their business and barely attending, or kicking their heels back and taking a vacation. They want to know that you're into the business school experience. Now, I can think of different people that we've worked with over the years who've gone back to business school. And I can think of different schools that they've gone to. One fellow in particular who went back to the Columbia J-term, because that's a program for people who are entrepreneurs in some ways. It's like, doesn't have a summer internship, come in, get the education. And this person was very much a happenstance entrepreneur. An amazing story, actually. I can't tell you too much about it, but during the pandemic, he found a way, when people were panicking, he found a way basically to lease a ton of very cheap space. And he used that cost advantage to build out a series of stores that had enormous costs built into leases. And he had a competitive advantage and built it and sold it. And it was like, he kind of felt like he was, maybe I'm putting words into his mouth, but kind of felt like he was in the right place at the right time, saw an opportunity, was lucky, but maybe didn't have the full suite of capabilities and skills. And he wanted all the context. Like I said before, he wanted the market. Like he had all the risk and he had the intelligence and he did it. And he has nothing to apologize for. He did an awesome job. But he felt like, hey, if I'm doing this again, I want a little more context for what I'm doing. I've had a whole bunch of people in family business who've been in an entrepreneurial environment supporting someone who said, look, like, I don't want to be the boss's son or the boss's daughter.
Right.
I want to go in there and I want to really understand the business, and I want to build this thing for the next generation. Like, I'm not thinking about 2 years from now. And so, you know, to me, I've got skills that I want to develop for when this is a totally different company.
Right.
So that's another one that I can think of where it's there's the argument is there.
Listen, I
can think of individuals who made mistakes even. There's an individual who I can think he sold the business for $10 million right before going to Harvard. He had lots of partners. I don't believe that he received all that money himself. And he talked candidly about some of the bumps and bruises along the way and some of the mistakes they made. And I think in reading between the lines, I think maybe he was sort of maybe even squeezed out after the acquisition and was looking for the next place to jump. And he was humble. He said, I've got a lot to learn as an entrepreneur. I want to do it again.
That's right.
I think that what you can't do is kind of say like, I'm an entrepreneur and I'll learn a little bit more and I'll figure it out. Like, you got to have a real purpose.
Right. And you have to look down a decade from now, 10, 20 years from now and say, okay, what do I know now and how am I going to learn it? And some of those things you can learn in business school. Like, for me, I always come back to this notion of leadership, this idea here of you're going to have to talk to a lot more people, negotiate, and just have different types of relationships. And one way to accelerate your relationship building skills is through business school. And then also just this notion here of, okay, how is the world changing around me? Just what your career will look like 10 years from now, what sort of skills you're going to need, and being very honest.
And like, I mean, you know, think about the MBA as like a foundational layer, and think about after that you're growing through experience. Like, there are still things that I'm learning every day. There are still, you know, we've done an acquisition as a firm, and that was a massive educational process for me because I you know, was very much steeped in a tradition of like, you just work at it every day, make your product better, your service better, you know, make your people better. Everything gets almost like atomic habits. Everything gets a little incrementally better every day, and the gains for your company are enormous. And I feel like we lived that for 20 years. But then it was like, hey, there's another opportunity here. There's a whole other set of skills that I can develop that'll be really interesting and challenging for me. And you know, it wasn't like I learned that in business school, how to acquire a small complementary competitor. In this case, we acquired Accepted, which does everything we don't do in education. So they help people with college, law school, med, grad school, and really, you know, understanding that, like, the company wasn't capable. I wasn't capable of that 15 years ago. I'm not sure if we were capable of that 10 years ago. But like, we really have learned so much and scaled to the point where we have these functions in our company that we can responsibly do this and be great stewards of another company. So like, some of the learning it comes way later on.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Like, I think we think too much of entrepreneurship as, and there's a great Malcolm Gladwell article about this where he talks about how people think that entrepreneurs are, maybe we can link it in the bottom
that's
here.
Right, yes.
People think that entrepreneurs are like individuals who are just shooting for the stars. When in fact they're individuals who see who have imperfect information that benefits them. So the example he gives in that is something like Ted Turner, who people think is like just a cowboy. There was a UHF TV station that he inherited from his father at the age of like 29, and they were broadcasting Atlanta Braves games, and the Braves came up for sale for about the same amount that they were paying for the broadcast rights. So he bought the Atlanta Braves. And people were like, Ted Turner bought the Atlanta Braves at 29 or 30, whatever it was. It wasn't that he bought. He just looked and said, the amount of money I'm spending on TV rights, I may as well buy the team. And so and then he just figured out how to grow the team, and the rest is history. I believe the UHF station slowly turned into TBS.
Became exactly. No, that's right.
You know, again, I think like, our conception is that these are just complete cowboys when in fact it's really the opposite. And you can see that even in, like, I believe another example in that article is John Paulson, who during the financial meltdown was one of the few people who really saw the credit crisis fall apart and saw the opportunity to get into the credit swap default game and made billions of dollars. He fundamentally, like Michael Berry and others, fundamentally just saw the hole in the market. Was like, there's something wrong here. I see risk in a different way than everyone else now, and that's not being a cowboy. That's I mean, maybe it required a lot of nerve in that regard, but like he understood risk differently and was able to make his fortune that way. It's not always about just like let's max out the credit cards, mortgage the house, go in on a product, and the whole thing's going to go bananas.
Absolutely not. Which is one reason to go to business school, obviously, is to meet some of these people.
You think about the networks of these schools, and you think about the alumni and the ability of the schools to connect you with the alumni. So this is so random, but I was on vacation. I saw someone who maybe it was 10 years older than me wearing a Darden hat. And I just walked up to him and introduced myself because you see a few of them and it's fun. It's a small school, small alumni base. And got to talk to this person, and I believe he was a manufacturer of roofing solutions, shingles. And from talking to him, it seemed like it was a pretty substantial business. And he told me that, again, I think before that name really existed, it was just entrepreneurship through acquisition. He had run a business well. He had found some backers who helped him to find this business, and he'd been growing it successfully. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget it. He looked at me and he said, when you're done with your business, when you sell your business, he said, give me a call. He said, if you need funding for your next business because you'll do something bigger, he said, give me a call. He said, I've got the same group of guys. You seem like you're a good guy. We'll do it for you. And I said, we'll do it with you. And I was like, that's so flattering.
Amazing,
and so nice. And he said to me, but the rule is, he said, the first $5 billion of profits are yours. The next $1 million you have to give to Darden. Otherwise, we're not doing it with you.
That's fantastic.
And I was like, it was such a hilarious thing because not only had he just met me and had this I assume unjustified confidence in me based on our own network and his own understandings of my education. But he was basically operating on the assumption that there was a guaranteed $5 billion, and after that we'll see what happens. It gives you a sense of how networks in this environment work, and the confidence of alumni in each other, and that's a uniquely American thing that doesn't really exist in my hometown, my own country of Canada. You don't see people talking that way, behaving that way, and that should be very heartening, I think, for especially any internationals who come here and maybe don't recognize the power of the alumni networks.
Okay, great.
Well, good luck with your entrepreneurship if you've been listening. Good luck with your journey. I'm sure, we hope that one day someone will call us and say, I watched that podcast.
Exactly. And I went to business school, I'm an entrepreneur, and now I'm giving you $1 million. I'm giving Darden $1 million.
Exactly.
There we go. Terrific then. Well, listen, seriously, give us a call. Free 30-minute consultation to speak to me, to speak to Jeremy, or speak to any member
of our team. And whether you're an entrepreneur or not, we're happy to give you advice.
Exactly. We're always here to speak to you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Perfect.
If you want to be one of our success stories, sign up for a free consultation with a member of our full-time MBA admissions team. Since we've worked with tens of thousands of applicants over the past 2 decades, we can give you our honest opinion on your chances and help you put together your very best application. That is not a sales call, but rather your first session with one of us for free. We can give you a profile evaluation, answer specific questions about the process, review your resume, talk about your school choices, and so much more. Sign up at mbaMission.com/consult. We look forward to working with you.